Trying to avoid being nervous is a pointless task. I tend to think that people perform better when they're kind of on the edge, right? If you're too comfortable, that's when you get sloppy.
Hi, I'm AJ, the host of Shake Hands, Take Names. You see this person right here, David Phillips, from working at Microsoft with Bill Gates as worldwide intelligence lead to Louis Vuitton as a global director of marketing, and now leading economic development change right here in Truro, Colchester. How did he do all that? Networking. Not just any networking, strategic, powerful relationship building. In this episode, he's revealing it all, how he did it, and how you can do it too. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The very first question that I want to start with is, how did everything start for you? Was there a connection of yours early on that inspired you to think differently, think bigger? How did that connection change your career trajectory?
Well, first of all, I should say that I was not a child of immense ability. I wasn't a great student in school. I wasn't a great athlete. The one thing that I did get really excited about in my teenage years was politics. I came from a fairly political family. My dad was very active in politics, and I really loved it. And I got involved fairly young. And the cool thing about politics is that you can be a teenager and be meeting people that you see on television, ministers and leaders and people who want to be successful politicians. And so you learn quite young how to communicate with people that you really look up to. The other thing about politics is that you learn about issues and you learn about policies. So you're able to learn to talk about issues and current affairs and history and things that are happening in the country. So it's a really unique way to become articulate and interesting, and to learn how to comport yourself in, large groups of important people. And so that was really how I got started, learning how to network, present myself to people, earn their trust, get them to listen to me and pay attention to me and give me things to do, ultimately.
Okay. And that question with how that one relationship changed your career trajectory, I wanted to resonate a bit on that. Because for me, that connection was you. So David and my story goes back to 2.5 years ago, where I was blessed enough to have him at one of the networking events that NSCC organized. And I was scared to say hello, but I just went up to him and I said hello. And I said something along the line of, big fan of your career trajectory, would love to know more and would love to be a mentee of yours. So that was my relation that changed my career trajectory.
When I met you, the impression that I got was probably similar to the impression that I gave people when I was your age. Because when you came to introduce yourself to me, you were prepared. You had done a little bit of homework about me. You had prepared questions that you could ask. You showed some knowledge of my career and my background. I think it's an extremely valuable skill for young people today, because most young people aren't very articulate. They aren't very good communicators, and it's a really incredible skill to have, so that you could come up to someone that you wanted to meet, and you could sound intelligent and you could sound interesting, and that's how you captured my interest, right? And after that very first impression, my reaction was, this is someone that we should have in our community and that we should nurture and support. That's exactly the kind of impression you want to leave on someone the first time you meet them.
I think the biggest struggle for me was being nervous that what's the impression I'm going to end up giving to you while I was coming up and talking to you. But I overcome that fear and I put that aside for a second and I pretended. I faked it till I made it.
Right.
And that kind of helped a lot. And I'm assuming that you did the same thing. when you were young, when you were in my age, doing the same thing? I'm assuming you did the same thing. You were also nervous at some point in time.
Yeah, it was. I'm not really an extrovert,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew that, when I thought about the course in which I wanted my life to go, I was going to have to be able to introduce myself to people and put myself out there. Um, and I'm really fortunate that I had the mother that I had, because as I mentioned, when I was a kid, I didn't have, there weren't a lot of things I did well. And it was my mother who actually, when I was probably 12, 13 years old, pushed me towards things like public speaking and debate, youth parliament, because of that interest I had in politics. Um, and she pushed me towards things that would help me hone my communication skills. And she thought, well, gosh, if he can't do anything else, maybe we can teach him to communicate. Um, and I would honestly say that everything that I've accomplished in my career comes down to my ability to communicate. It's something that I started working on very early in life. That political interest gave me a context in which to develop those skills, um, and it's helped me every step of the way. And like you just said, I even learned to be able to be articulate about things I didn't know a lot about. So that fake until you make it thing is really critical. And having basic communication skills can help you appear to know what you're talking about and appear to be a credible, smart, serious person when you're actually still working on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a perfect relay to the second question I have. You mentioned previously that 9 out of 11 jobs you had were attained through networking and relationships that you built. How did you build that credibility?
Yeah, well, I think again with starting with a political hobby as opposed to playing hockey, or not to disparage hockey, especially today. Um, but being involved in politics, things like youth parliament, public speaking, um, you learn fairly quickly that when you're talking to people, that you want your conversation to be factual and evidence based, right? And um, so when you're talking to these people that you look up to and people that may be able to help you one day, you want to make a strong impression, and the way you do that is by trying to come across as smart and prepared, and well read. Um, and when you meet your first few people that see that in you, it's amazing how your career becomes almost like a game of dominoes. That person introduces you to another person,
Mm-hmm.
and that person introduces you to another person. And when you hear very successful people, rich, famous billionaires, get asked the question, how did you get where you got? They always talk about the people who helped them along the way. Nobody achieves success alone. You always achieve success because other people have been ambitious for you,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they've introduced you along. And so I think in my career, yeah, I've had quite a lot of jobs, but I think there was probably only one that I actually got because I read it in a newspaper or on a job site or something. Everything else was because someone called me and said, here's a job that I think is suitable for you, or I asked someone to help me get that job. It was almost always because of someone in my network stepping up and endorsing me.
Yeah. So when people think about David Phillips, the credibility, the brand image that comes to their mind is someone who could get the job done. That's the credibility that you had built with the skills that you acquired in politics, right?
Yeah, I think I showed people that I was a quick study,
Mm-hmm.
that I learned quickly, that I was smart, that I was adaptable. Um, you have to think in this world, especially when very few people go to a company when they're 20 and work there until they're 65. Most people have multiple jobs, sometimes many jobs throughout their career. And in a lot of those cases, it's not the same job, or it's not even a similar job. So you really need to focus on your transferable skills and to be able to communicate those, to show that you're flexible and adaptable and agile, because that's what the market looks for today, is people who can learn quickly on their feet and add value very
Mhm.
quickly.
How did you navigate the corporate world at Microsoft and LVMH? Was there a strategic approach you used to build the connections there?
It probably wasn't as strategic as it could be. I've not lived a sort of paint by numbers life. My career has been a really nice mix of intention and serendipity. Um, I'll just give you one example. When I started working at Microsoft Canada, um, I was a market intelligence manager, so I was kind of a middle level manager at the subsidiary. And one of the guys that I built quite a strong relationship with was an analyst, a business analyst who wasn't much older than you. Um, and I wasn't one of these people who just managed up. I didn't just want to meet the senior people and the people who could sort of help me move forward. I met the people that I liked and I had common interests with, and this guy was one of them. He was an interesting person. He was smart, and became quite good friends. And corporate life being as it is in big multinational corporations, um, I ended up in a job at Microsoft Europe, Microsoft EMEA, actually, the Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so it was a regional bureaucratic level that was being dismantled. And so my job was going to go away. And so I had two choices. I could either go work for a smaller group like Western Europe, or I could go to Corp.
Mm-hmm.
And as it happens, in that time that I was at Microsoft Europe, he went right past that bureaucratic level and went straight to Corp into a senior management position at Corp. So I reached out to him and I said, I want to work for you. And this kid that I befriended way back at Microsoft Canada that probably nobody else paid much attention to suddenly became my boss, and I ended up the worldwide field intelligence manager at Microsoft Corporation. So in one way, you have to be intentional
Mm-hmm.
about the people you network with and the people you meet. But a lot of my success was about spending time with people that I just liked. They weren't necessarily people that I thought could help me.
Yep.
They were just people that I admired and enjoyed being with,
Mm-hmm.
and it all worked out. So don't look down on anybody where you work, because you never know who's going to end up in positions that can help you in the future.
Yes. So the key summary is relationship building. It's important. Because if we talk about the level of seniority, your position was senior to his, and he started, and later on the tables turned. But you had nurtured a good relationship with him that ended up getting you the worldwide intelligence lead at Microsoft. So the relationship building is key, right?
Absolutely, and it's about not. For me, it was not about being strategic per se. Like I wasn't lying home in bed saying, "Who do I need to meet? Who's going to help me?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just about going out and meeting people. He and I were in a similar part of the company where we were both creating knowledge and finding information to help inform strategy. So we were in a similar world. We had similar interests and similar things in common. Um, and I think it's just you have to kind of put out into the universe your desire to meet people and not necessarily be too paint by numbers about it. You can't. I've known people who have been successful by being very machine like in the design of their career. I don't know how fulfilling or happy that career is. I think priority one is being happy every day in your job, and that's surrounding yourself by people that you like and that you enjoy working with. And as luck may have it, that may help you career wise going forward.
Mm. You worked with some of the most influential names, like Bill Gates. How did you build the trust with the decision makers and industry giants?
Well, certainly the first senior executives, really high-powered people that I started to work with, were at Microsoft. Microsoft is a very data-centric
Mm-hmm.
business. Every decision is evidence-based. And I was in market intelligence and strategy, so I was the keeper of the knowledge. So that it was very easy for me to navigate those waters because I was the guy with the data. And the key to success in a company like Microsoft was having information. And that information could be imparted to a senior executive either to help validate an opinion that they have about market opportunities or threats, or challenge their existing thinking. Either way, you're adding value. So it was a really fun position for me to be in because people looked to me to answer questions that they had. And if I was doing my job right, I was able to do that. So I was able to, because of the nature of my role as a market intelligence person and a strategist, I was able to punch above my weight class in the company. So I got into meetings that from a role level perspective, I had no business being in, but I was there because of the nature of my role. And that's how I got access to these really fascinating people, and that's how I was able to get their ear.
Yes. So basically, they had that trust in you that whatever information you're going to be providing them is evidence-based. And that basically helped you get into those meetings with important people.
Everyone was smart at Microsoft.
Okay.
And the last thing you wanted to do was to try to go it on your own and try to express an opinion that was based on instinct or gut feeling or whatever. Because they would say, that doesn't make any sense. Where did you get that? Right? So the way people asked for more information at Microsoft was by saying, that doesn't make any sense. So you had to get used to being challenged. And the ones who survived were the ones who could say, when someone like Bill Gates says to you, that doesn't make any sense, you can stop and breathe and say, well, let me tell you how I got to that. And then walk them through the data and the logic. And then if you're right, you survive.
Okay. So the key to survival is not to be nervous when you're probed with questions, and explain to them.
You're going to be nervous. And there's not, even in just basic networking, you're going to be nervous. Trying to avoid being nervous is a pointless task. What you need to do is use that nervous energy to be even better on your feet, right? I tend to think that people perform better when they're kind of on the edge, right? If you're too comfortable, that's when you get sloppy. And the cool thing about working at a company like Microsoft is you're never comfortable. You're always nervous and you're always on your toes. And as a result of that, I found you're always at the top of your game.
Okay. So nervousness is not something to be scared of, but you should learn how to make it your power.
That's right. It's like Franklin Roosevelt once said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Fear is inescapable. What separates the players from the non-players is how you manage through that and use it, leverage it. And that includes, when you're a community college student and you're going up to meet a senior leader in your community, you're going to be nervous. And that's what I tell people when I do, talks and presentations on networking skills and strategies. Don't wait until you're not going to be nervous, because you're always going to be nervous. I'm nervous doing this, right? But these are things that if you want to be a business professional, you got to get past it. You've got to manage your way through it.
Okay. And would you say that applies to all profession, even if it's not business related?
I think there are still jobs out there where you don't need to be a people person and you don't need to network. But even just to get a job, is going to require you sitting down in front of someone in an interview or in some kind of conversation. So I'm not sure you can ever escape networking. And I'm not sure you want to, because when you get good at it, like you are, it becomes fun. And it becomes kind of a game and an adventure. And I think, whether you're in business or whether you're in a manufacturing plant or whether you're a doctor, your ability to deal with people and win them over and build relationships with them is always going to be a golden skill.
Did you ever face challenges while networking? How did you turn those challenges into opportunity?
Yeah, I've had challenges. And I think I can chalk them all up to one thing, and that would be inauthenticity. trying to be someone I'm not, or trying to pretend I'm someone I'm not just to impress someone. And, there's probably a few examples that I could think of when I did that and it didn't go very well, or I felt really stupid, or it came back to bite me later. Um, but the one example I'll give you is kind of funny. I was working at LVMH um, in the division Moet Hennessy, which is the wines and spirits division. It's the second largest division of the LVMH group. And I was at a meeting in New York, and one of my bosses was Gilles Hennessy, and he was the scion of the Hennessy cognac family, and basically French royalty. And I hadn't gotten very close to him at that point. And we ended up at the buffet table together during lunch.
Yes.
And his son had recently started a perfume brand called By Kilian, which is now a very famous perfume brand. So Gilles Hennessy and I were standing at the buffet, and I said, "So Gilles, I bought some of your son's new cologne." And he said, "Oh yes, which one?" The fact is I hadn't bought the cologne. I was just trying to build a bridge and make conversation.
Yes.
So I started sort of humming and hawing and saying, "Oh, I can't remember the name now. It's one of the more masculine ones." And he said, "Probably Cruel Intentions." And I said, "Yes, that's it, Cruel Intentions." And so that afternoon, when the meeting was over, I kind of thought I'd better have the cologne.
Yeah.
So I ran down through New York to Bergdorf Goodman and went into Bergdorf Goodman to buy Kilian's Cruel Intentions. And it turns out that a bottle about that size was $500.
Wow.
But I kind of had to buy it because if he saw me in the elevator the next day and didn't smell it on me, I was going to probably have some questions to answer. So that little lie cost me $500 and a lot of personal embarrassment. The learning from those experiences, you really just need to be yourself, and you need to see the value in yourself. And when you're meeting with people, empathy is a big deal, and when you're meeting people and networking, you need to always be thinking about not just what they can do for you, but what you can do for them, and think about your own authentic abilities and skills. Don't ever try to be something you're not or pretend you're something you're not. Just be yourself, and people will appreciate that and respect it.
Now, we're going to talk about strategic networking a little bit. Is there a particular moment where the strategic networking led to a direct breakthrough opportunity for you?
Yeah, there have been many opportunities like that. The word strategic's a big word. I think sometimes you can be naturally strategic. So it's you wouldn't necessarily think that it's a strategic networking opportunity at the moment. But I'll give you one example. I right out of university, I started working on Parliament Hill for my local member of parliament. And at some point during my time there, the Premier of Nova Scotia resigned. This was around 1988. And I was sent down to Nova Scotia to help organize the leadership convention to select the new Premier. And during that time, I met a man that I didn't know before, and he owned a big advertising agency in Halifax. And I really liked him. We really bonded. He was a very good person, a very nice person, and very helpful as a kind of like a mentor to a young up and coming person. And when the leadership convention was over, my plan was to go back to Parliament Hill, but the member of parliament that I worked for said, "I'm not really sure we're a fit." So that was the end of my job on Parliament Hill. And so suddenly I'm out of a job. And I was in Halifax, and one night I was wandering around South End and the waterfront of Halifax thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I looked up at this building and I realized that this man's advertising agency was in this building. And suddenly I just had this eureka moment. I'm going to take him out for lunch and ask his advice on what my next steps should be in my career. And I did. And he agreed to come out for lunch. I took a binder with me of all of my writing, poems, short stories, press releases that I had written for my boss in Ottawa, speeches that I had written for him, all kinds of stuff. And he was reading through it, and he was saying, well, you should maybe think about Mount St. Vincent, doing PR, or going to get a commerce degree, or something. Because I knew at this point I wanted to be in business. And then he said, if you want to see if you like this kind of business, you could come and work for me for a while. And next thing I knew, I had a job at one of Nova Scotia's biggest advertising agencies. And when I met him during the leadership convention and built that relationship with him, I wasn't thinking he can help me someday, right? But in that moment of despair, when I'm thinking, what am I going to do next? He popped into my head, and the fact that I had met him and built that relationship turned out to be very helpful.
Yes. So that was the direct breakthrough of being strategic about networking.
Absolutely. I was never unemployed again after that.
That being said, what inspired you to shift from international business to community leadership and economic development in Truro and Colchester?
I think from an early time in my life, I always had a feeling of the need to serve the community in some way. When I went to university, my plan was to become an Anglican priest. And that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. I ended up in business, and I got into business fairly early in my career, realized I did it well, and I enjoyed it, and I knew I could make good money at it. So I started out at that advertising agency doing mostly market research, and my role sort of morphed into market intelligence, and then strategy, and then marketing as a general career. And the next thing you know, I've been working in business for 30 years. And in 2019, I had a major health crisis in which I almost died. And I did survive it. And I went through that usual sort of existential angst, what is life all about, and this sort of thing. And I thought, well, if I'm going to devote part of my life and career to community service, this is probably the time. And serendipitously, a friend of mine sent me a job description from the Truro-Colchester Partnership. Truro was my hometown. I hadn't lived there in 32 years, but I thought, wow, if you're gonna spend a big chunk of your career contributing and giving back to your community, wouldn't the community I came from and the community I love the most be the place to do that? So we packed up the family and moved back to Truro. And I took a job as a business development officer at TCPEP, providing advisement to startups and small businesses and entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. Then my boss, the CEO, left to go on the next part of his career journey, and I became CEO. And it's not the money I'm used to. It's not as adventurous. I'm not going all over the world on planes, but it's the most fulfilling job I've ever had.
So you're saying you've got a boring team?
Love my team. That's a big part of what gets me up in the morning is working with people like you and the others on our team. But just spending my days helping people fulfill their dreams of entrepreneurship, while at the same time helping grow economic prosperity in my hometown. It's a pretty cool way to end your career.
So for someone just starting out, what would your words of wisdom be in terms of networking to that person?
I look at networking from the perspective of an introvert. And so something I said earlier is something I would want to sort of double down on. Networking isn't comfortable for everyone. Some people are absolute naturals at it, but most of us aren't. For most of us, it takes a lot of courage, and it's like learning to skate or learning to swim or learning to ski. It can be very uncomfortable in the beginning. The only thing I would say is life isn't meant to be comfortable, and the important things that you do in your life are not typically comfortable. And so in your early days of networking, I think it's hugely important to understand that it's going to feel awkward. You're going to feel inauthentic. You're going to feel uncomfortable. But in the business community in particular, it's expected, it's celebrated, it's respected, and it will get you where you want to go. The only thing I would say in addition to that is I think it's hugely important for young people to understand and be clear in their minds about what they want out of life, who they want to be as a person, for themselves and for other people. What do they want? Where do they want to go? That's kind of step one. Step two is what do they do well? Because I think people achieve the sweet spot in their career when they find that point of convergence where something you love doing and something you do really well and there's a need for it. That's the sweet spot, and that's where you achieve your maximum potential in your career. You can do things well that you don't enjoy doing, or you can do things that you enjoy doing that you don't do well, and you'll achieve a certain level of success. But when you can pull those things together, you love doing something and you're really good at it, that's when you're going to soar. And I think it's really important to do that reflecting before you start going out into the world and trying to build your career. I think too many of us make knee-jerk decisions based on opportunities that present themselves or a sense of urgency because they have student loans to pay or whatever. But you really need to take that time early to think about what you want your life to look like, say, when you're my age, right? And start there and work backwards. And that causes you to be intentional about your life, your choices, the people you meet, and the conversations you have with them.
When it comes to relationship building, I believe building a brand and your personal brand is really important. What would be your key advice to someone trying to build their personal brand and personal network?
Authenticity, and that's honesty with others, but also honesty with yourself. I think it's hugely important to know yourself, to know what you love doing, to know what you're good at, and to build a life and a career based on your natural strengths. Everyone has natural gifts and strengths. And I think where we go astray in our careers is when we go off in a direction that doesn't speak to those natural gifts and strengths. Doesn't mean you'll fail. And it doesn't mean that you won't do extremely well. But unless you can find that sweet spot where you love what you're doing and you do it really well, you're never going to achieve your full potential. And so I think that, being honest with yourself and not trying to be someone you're not when you're talking to others.
Thank you for listening. And if you're an upcoming graduate in Colchester, Cumberland, or Pictou, and you're looking to get connected in the career that you want to get into, please reach out to me on my website, northnsconnector.ca.